Welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video. So today I want to talk about the most overrated CGC 9.8 comic books. Yeah, I got a short list of 7 here and some honorable mentions, so 12 overrated CGC 9.8 comic books to talk about. And you know, usually on the channel here, I'm really recommending like all the 9.8s that I really love. But I think it really makes sense to kind of just think of some 9.8s that, you know, I think are overvalued or a little bit overrated. And usually there's pretty decent reasons, I think, for thinking that, and we'll kind of look on the CGC census and everything like that. But one thing to mention too, a lot of the reasoning, I think, is really CGC 9.8 specific. Like, these are great books. These are just awesome books. I think just a lot of times, maybe some of these overrated ones are just not as special in the 9.8. So, or maybe there's another option in the 9.8 to consider that I think is a better investment grade book. I think that ends up being some of the case for these books. But a lot of times too, maybe just better to purchase in the raw and save like hundreds of dollars, since these ones maybe aren't as special in my opinion in the CGC 9.8. But okay, let's get into it. A short list of 7, 12 altogether to get through of overrated, maybe overvalued ones that some of these I've passed on, some I have, so it'll be interesting to kind of get through it. First one on the list is an X-Men number 4. Yeah, X-Men number 4 from the early 90s. First appearance of Omega Red. Really popular, cool, really cool Jim Lee cover. You know, this was a really popular comic book of the era, so there's a lot of CGC 9.8s out there. We'll talk about a bit of an alternative, I think is probably a better CGC 9.8 collector item than this one. Also, there are these, I think like Omega Red's going to be like a villain in the Falcon Winter Soldier show or movie. I don't even know what's going on specifically, but this book has heated up a little bit in my experience here, and I just think at this heated up price, this is definitely one that I think is just overrated right now. On the census, 2,040 CGC 9.8s in the blue label, so over 2,000 of them now. This is one at my local comic shop. I got a really good kind of back issue comic shop in town. There are like 10 of these in the back bins up there. The X-Men number 4, not near mint, but there's just so many of these printed, so many of these out there. So I would expect, you know, if they decided to kind of go more with Omega Red, there would be a lot more 9.8s to pop up, and there's already a lot with a little bit over 2,000 there, and over half of them are CGC 9.8, so 56.2% of all graded copies are CGC 9.8s, and that, yeah, that's not really anything to write home about in rarity. So I think given that the price is heating up and, you know, not a rare 9.8, mention that other option there, I really would, you know, over this one, consider an Uncanny X-Men 256. The first new Psylocke, really cool Jim Lee Mandarin cover. Yeah, I prefer that one. There's a lot less of those in the CGC 9.8. I just think it's a better collector item. And with X-Men number 4, I mentioned the prices there heating up. Looking on the completed listings, one selling in an auction just in the last couple days, $167.50. In the last month here, a deal was kind of like $150, $140, so they're going a little bit less than maybe the one in the auction here. Maybe, you know, that's just probably near the higher end of a fair market value right now. But in my experience in the last 2-3 years, this was kind of one that tempted me around when it was $100 in the CGC 9.8, like first Omega Red, Jim Lee cover, $100. Cool, but you know, I think getting over 150 with a lot of them out there, I would, at that price, is about the price. You can even get the Uncanny X-Men 256 for less than 150 pretty much, so I do prefer that book and just think X-Men number 4 is a little bit overrated in the CGC 9.8. Early 90s book, a lot of them printed during the early 90s, so if it's not just a huge key in the early 90s, a lot of times, you know, they're kind of a candidate to be overrated 9.8 books, I guess. All right, next one here we'll get into is a Batman The Killing Joke. Yeah, so I got one. I got a Killing Joke. I got one in the raw too. You know, me just being a big Batman and a Joker fan, it is one to want. But I think maybe a little bit overrated, and possibly there's just better. We'll get into an alternative I think is just a better value. It is a classic book, but because it's a classic book now, If you look on the census, there's a 3,082 in the blue label out there. So over 3,000 of something, just like from a collector standpoint, is for me like starts to get like meh. Like I'm just like 3,000 of something just isn't that collectible and rare, I guess. This one's really popular, but pricing heating up a little bit. Interesting on this one. It's a 45% though, the CGC 9.8 ratio. This one, yeah, just being a late 80s book too, you'd like to maybe see that a little bit lower. This is kind of one of those trade paperback kind of, comics. So they're I think a little bit easier to stay in better shape, if that makes sense. So the Killing Joke, not very rare in the 9.8, and there's over 3,000 in the blue label. Looking at prices lately, I thought this one would heat up quite a lot more when the Joker movie came out. But really, it didn't really, like, maybe there were some spikes, but it didn't really heat up that much. But, the market in the 9.8s has done really well in the last 6 months. And this one, completed listings on eBay this morning are about $225 to $250, all in that area. And I grabbed mine for it was like $200 like 2-3 years ago. And that was a bit of, like, looking back on that, it was one of the earlier ones I bought, and that was a bit of an overpay at the time. Like, I've saw auctions for this one go around $150 occasionally. $150 to $175 was a really good deal back then. But now, $225 to $250 with a lot of them out there in the 9.8. So mentioning an alternative there, I think a better alternative to this one is a Batman Vengeance of Bane. From the early 90s, and with the Vengeance of Bane book, there's about 1,000 of those. I think it's 900 and something in the 9.8 blue label. Plus the CGC 9.8 ratio is lower. It's in the 30s, I believe. So a more rare book, less of them in the 9.8, and you get a first appearance of Bane where, Killing Joke, great one. I got, like I said, I got him, but maybe you don't get the first appearance, and maybe it's not the best 9.8. So if you're not the hugest Batman fan, you could definitely, I think, settle for a raw in like a nice raw in Batman the Killing Joke. Absolutely. Okay, next one here. It'll be interesting to go through this. An Amazing Spider-Man 361. Yeah, I think right now, given a little bit of the timing on this book too, I think this one could go down in an overrated category. Got mine out specifically too in the direct edition. In the early 90s, the newsstands are quite collectible, and I feel like those are always kind of worth holding on to. But in the direct version for Amazing Spider-Man 361, first full appearance of Carnage, like a book I love, like absolutely. But on the census, 3,880 in the CGC 9.8 in the blue label. There's about, I think it's like 800 and some in the signature series, so there's like 4,500 of these in the 9.8 altogether. That's a lot, yeah. Just, getting over 4,000, even worse from a collector standpoint, from a rarity standpoint. 9.8 ratio, 26.1%, a little bit better with the 9.8 ratio. This is just so popular. There's so many of these graded. Coming out in the early 90s where comic book printing was at its peak, basically. So, okay, yeah, and, just said I really love this book, but with that Venom 2 movie coming out next year, this is going to be a tough one to get, and I just have a feeling a year after this Venom 2 movie, you're going to be able to pick this one up in the direct for like 400, 450 area. Right now, I think they're about 550 to 600. I think one we documented on our video there went for $625 in a direct version, with most of these 3,880 in the blue label being the direct versions. Yeah, I just think, in a year, there's always going to be a lot of supply for this issue with that amount of numbers. So, a year or two after this Venom 2 movie, if Carnage kind of lulls a bit in popularity or whatever might happen, I just have a feeling you'll be able to get this one for a better price. And this one has basically been trending up like this slowly for the last 6 to 12 months. Yeah, the directs used to go for like $350 to $400. Now they're $550 to $600. I got my newsstand for $410. Now they're over $700. Yeah, I think $750. I saw a newsstand completed sale. So I just feel you'll get a better price. Really like the book, but you'll probably get a better price 6 to 12 months after Venom 2, let's call it, for a great one in the 9.8, but maybe a bit overrated right now. Amazing Spider-Man number 361. Okay, next one is a Secret Wars number 8 in the CGC 9.8. really popular book. This one, I do think there's a better alternative in the CGC 9.8. If we have a look at Secret Wars, it's the origin of the symbiote costume that eventually becomes Venom. So in the 9.8, 3,653. In the 9.8 blue label, that's a lot. This is a 84 book, I believe, kind of mid-80s. That's quite a lot of 9.8s for a mid-80s book. The alternative that we'll talk about in a second here, I think, is less 9.8s, more rare, lower 9.8 ratio, more relatively rare, just a better book all around. Secret Wars number 8, though, 28.1% is the CGC 9.8 ratio, which is not, you know, it's that I would say is pretty much an average ratio, nothing sort of investment grade. Yeah, if we for Secret Wars number 8, I do prefer, because it's a cool one, like a lot of these books, cool one. I think in the 9.8 though, I would put most of my Secret Wars money with it kind of heating up and being a really serious 9.8 now. I would put a little more of that money toward Amazing Spider-Man 252 in the CGC 9.8. Yeah, so there's about a little over 1,000 of those in the 9.8 blue label, and the 9.8 ratio is right around 10%. Of all graded copies are 9.8s rather than 28.1%, so the lower the better with these 9.8 percentages and ratios. So Amazing Spider-Man just looks like the way better book, and Secret Wars 8, I've always thought there was just way, like, so much on the census, like I'd way rather have a 252. The pricing for Secret Wars number 8 right now is sort of like the 425 to 450 level was where I was seeing some completed listings at. This is a book where I remember people on the team kind of really wanting it, and I always, even back then when it was cheaper, you know, sort of passed on it and thought it was a bit overrated. But people on the team were getting this for $200, let's call it 12 months ago now. So this has gone from $200 to kind of $450, $425. I think at that price, you just want to take that $450, $425, put it toward an Amazing Spider-Man 252, in my opinion, or just save a lot of money and buy a nice raw copy of Secret Wars number 8, because yeah, I don't think that very special in the super high grade for kind of an 80s book. So maybe yeah, last two with the symbiotes as well, with that Venom 2 movie coming out next year. It makes sense on the whole timing. And these are kind of the secondary keys, I would say. Like, you know, I could easily put Amazing Spider-Man 300 on this list and say that's a bit overrated and overvalued right now. Or Amazing Spider-Man 316, that's a little bit overrated and overvalued right now. But that's the top of the barrel, so those you can kind of justify holding them still. But I think these more secondary symbiote keys that have to do with the Venom 2 movie, like Amazing Spider-Man 361 and Secret Wars number 8, yeah, you might just want to be really patient on them. Wait till, you know, a year after this Venom 2 movie. I think the prices will be better in the 9.8. All right, next one here. It's a Venom Lethal Protector number 1. Yeah, this one I think, you know, a little bit overrated, and my little spiel there about the Venom 2 movie applies to this one too, I think. This one's still a pretty affordable one. So, yeah, if we look on the census though, 4,443 CGC 9.8s. For Venom Lethal Protector number 1. Yeah, really nostalgic book. Comics were so popular during the early 90s, so a lot of people getting this one graded and had it, so over 4,000 of them. 62%, the 9.8 ratio, so over half of all graded copies. 62% of all graded copies are CGC 9.8, so not a really rare book. Yeah, a lot of the same applies for these symbiote books right now with that movie. But completed listings right now for Venom Lethal Protector. Saw a decent deal. It was like 81 bucks in an auction. But some of them, I think there's one right now for like $99.99 in the blue label direct version. You know, the newsstand version might be worth holding on to, and, you know, is more rare during these 90s books. But Venom Lethal Protector, yeah, it's just one I think you know, you should kind of just be happy with like a $10 raw copy and save some money and put it toward a more rare 9.8 would just be my recommend. And during this time with that Venom 2 movie, like, these prices are a bit inflated on Lethal Protector, and I think, you know, it being a 90s book, it not being a super huge key, it's kind of a key, like for Venom's first solo, but after this Venom 2 promo just really dies down, this one could just be like 60 bucks in the 9.8 in the direct edition. There's a lot of them, so 4,443. Some of them being newsstands, but most of them directs. Just a lot of them, and one to be patient on, I think, and maybe settle for a raw with Venom Lethal Protector #1. All right, next one here is a really cool, great book. It's an Infinity Gauntlet #1 in the CGC 9.8 I want to talk about. So this one, you know, quite a few of them out there, and I really prefer an alternative to this one, sort of just, it looks better on the census, better 9.8, I think. But yeah, this one, you know, not too expensive. I think that's the good thing about this one. But again, I think if you save a little, not, you know, a super special 9.8 in my opinion. 1,611 CGC 9.8s out there. And, you know, this isn't like the first appearance of the Infinity Gauntlet or anything. It's, yeah, not a first appearance in that way. A lot of, you know, people just, you know, this is where they got a lot of the inspiration for these MCU movies. And that's a positive about this book for sure. But 31.6% the CGC 9.8 ratio. So not too bad. Like, this one isn't looking completely terrible for in the 9.8 on the census. However, I do really prefer a Silver Surfer 44 in the CGC 9.8. With that one, yeah, it's, you know, still less than 300, I think, in the 9.8 on the census, compared to 1,611 in this one. So, like, what would you rather have? Like a 1 of 300 collector item or a 1 of 1,600 collector item? Even better to Silver Surfer 44, a lower 9.8 ratio. It's in the 20 percentages. I think it's like 25 or something like that. So a little bit more relatively rare than Infinity Gauntlet #1 as well. So, and you get the big first appearance, the Infinity Gauntlet on the label and everything. Really collectible, I think. Silver Surfer 44 over time. I think it'll be a good one. Infinity Gauntlet, I think, is kind of a cool one too, but maybe a bit overrated in the 9.8 pricing. One sold for $132.50. I think some of these get up to about $150 right now. This book hasn't really heated up too much in the last 6 months with the broader, you know, 9.6 market. This one, I think, you know, maybe it was like 120, 110, you know, 6 to 12 months ago, but this one hasn't heated up too much, with one going for $132.50. And yeah, I just think the Silver Surfer 44 is the better book. This one maybe a tad overrated, and save some money, get it in the raw possibly for Infinity Gauntlet #1. Cool, great cover though. George Perez cover, yeah, with the Infinity Gauntlet cover. So classic. All right, a last one on the list, and we'll get into some honorable mentions. Yeah, well, interesting one here. It's Wolverine Limited Series #1. Yeah, so why do I think such a classic book like this is overrated? Yeah, I think it's a bit of a combination of on the census, there's quite a lot of them, and then there's another book out there that I just think is a lot cooler as a Wolverine collector item in the CGC 9.8. So Wolverine Limited Series, clearly I got one, so I definitely like it enough to grab one in the 9.8, certainly at that price point that I did about a year ago. This one, we'll talk about price in a sec. Wolverine Limited Series #1 though, 2,767 CGC 9.8s out there. So this is a earlier 80s book, and yeah, that's quite a lot for an early 80s book. I mean, it's a really, Wolverine's so popular, there's going to be a lot of 9.8s out there, but specifically for the early 80s, that's quite a lot. This always hit me, even when I was early on in my collecting, as wow, there's like quite a lot of Wolverine Limited Series #1s, and I was really patient buying this one near the lower end of fair value at the time because of that. Like, I was like, wow, there's just a lot out there. Like 20.7% the CGC 9.8 ratio, so not too bad, but you know, that's about the same as New Mutants 98. So, but this book's 10 years older, so that gives you an idea. Like, this one's not that rare in the 9.8 for how old this book is. So you put those, you know, on the census, just not spectacular to me. That's why I never wanted to overpay, even, you know, about a year ago. The one I do prefer over this one too, which makes me think this one is a bit overrated, is Uncanny X-Men #133 in the CGC 9.8. That's a great 9.8 collector item, I think, where there's like 2,700 of these. There's like, I think it's 200 of, 200 and something of Uncanny X-Men 133. I didn't look that up this morning, but way less in the 9.8 in the top grade. This Uncanny X-Men 133 predates Wolverine Limited Series #1, but it is a solo Wolverine story, and you get a sweet Wolverine cover. And the kicker, the 9.8 ratio is more rare, lower on Uncanny X-Men 133. So overall, 133 I think is a better book. Wolverine Limited, interesting. Some of the prices I'm seeing just in the last couple days here, like $440, $425. Whereas we had documented one that was like $525. And I was just like, over $500 for Wolverine Limited series is just a no for me, like a straight up no. It's not that rare. And what that brings in Uncanny X-Men 133 into play, because the fair value for that's like $450 to $500 kind of. I think it's done well in the market here in the last 6 months because it's a great book, but I think the Wolverine Limited Series #1 value should not be any, it shouldn't be that close to Uncanny X-Men 133. I think that's a way better buy in the 9.8, with it being much better on the census. And I purchased mine, it was about a year ago, for $276. So $276 now, like one went for $525, a couple in the last week here, $440, $425. Yeah, this is just one, like, I have a feeling it might cool down here a bit to like $350. A classic book though, again, and a lot of times, like, it's a great book, so maybe grab it in the raw in a nice grade and save yourself a couple $100 possibly. But yeah, might be, I think for this one, it's more about that Uncanny X-Men 133 just being a great 9.8, and like, now that the prices are even, I think you should go after that book. So yeah, maybe Wolverine Limited Series #1's not overrated, but just a better option out there, given where the prices have come. Okay, a couple honorable mentions here. Yeah, all right. Get into first here, Spawn #1, and I want to talk about it in the direct edition 9.8. I do, first appearance of Spawn, such a great cover, so nostalgic. So I do love this one, but I prefer it in the newsstand for sure, especially if you're coming at it from like an investment perspective. Because, yeah, in the direct Spawn CGC 9.8, even I couldn't help myself, and I do have one in the 9.8 direct. There's so many out there. There's like, I think it's over 6,000 in the blue label, plus there's a bunch of signature series, so like, pretty soon there's going to be over 10,000 in the CGC 9.8 of Spawn #1, most of those being direct. So yeah, personally, I have one, but that's one I just probably wish I didn't even pick up, because I guess it's kind of cool to have, and I got a decent deal on it. But I think it's a little bit overrated, a Spawn #1 in the direct edition. There's so many of them. Yeah, from a collector perspective, just probably one to, yeah, just get a cheap raw and, not have to pay. I think they're about $150 in the CGC 9.8 for Spawn #1 direct. Okay, next one on some overrated CGC 9.8s on the honorable mentions here. Edge of Spider-Verse #2. Yeah, so this is one, I've always basically preferred Ultimate Fallout #4 in the CGC 9.8. And Edge of Spider-Verse 2 was always like neck and neck in price in the 9.8 with Ultimate Fallout 4, certainly in the last 2 years of me collecting 9.8s. But on the census, Ultimate Fallout 4, much more relatively rare. The 9.8 ratio is like 30-ish%. Edge of Spider-Verse is, I didn't look this morning, I think it's like high 50s. So not nearly as relatively rare. There's a little bit more of Edge 2 in the 9.8 as well. So I always saw it, Edge 2 definitely doesn't deserve to be neck and neck in price with Ultimate Fallout 4. It should be, given that Ultimate Fallout 4 is about $925, let's call it right now. I think an Edge of Spider-Verse 2 could be like $600. But I think right now they're like $800, $700. So I think this one's just a bit overrated, not too rare in the 9.8, much prefer Miles. And, this is the one to get, certainly, if you like Spider-Gwen. But, maybe you could just get a raw and save a bunch of money. Or if you were coming at it from an investment perspective, completely, I would much prefer Ultimate Fallout #4 in the CGC 9.8 for a couple $100 more maybe, but well worth it, I think. Cool one though, for sure. Next one, similar vein to that, an NYX #3. Yeah, NYX #3. I think, a little bit overrated, only from the perspective of like, I just don't like the cover. Just not eye appealing. It's never really, looked at me like, oh, you got to collect this one. Maybe more, desirable from, like, I think if an X-23 movie came out, this book would explode. Like, this is the one-to-one. It looks pretty good on the census, too. This isn't one I can dog too much on the census. It's not quite as rare as Ultimate Fallout 4 in the 9.8, but I think there's less of them out there than Ultimate Fallout 4, and the 9.8 ratio is a little bit higher. It's a little bit less relatively rare. But for this one, just not as collectible for me in the 9.8 with that cover. But I think you can make a good argument for this one with it being pretty good on the census, and I do think an X-23 movie would be really cool. But maybe a bit overrated in my opinion, possibly. All right, next one. Honorable mentions. It's a Venom number 3, the first print I'll go with for Venom number 3. Because Venom number 3, the third print, I think will kind of be the one to want over time for like the biggest Null fans. You know, with the cool cover, the lower print. I think in the CGC 9.8, that's a pretty cool one. In the first print, I think there could still be some cooling off in price to do here in the CGC 9.8 for Null. Like, you know, villains tend to get really hot and they don't have the staying power as much as like a, you know, a really good hero or a classic hero, I think. There's that. In the first print on Venom number 3 specifically, like I don't like the cover at all, basically. It's like one of those concept-y kind of covers, but, you know, doesn't really have anything to do with Null and never really caught my eye very much. So a lot of villains sort of end up being like 225 to 250 in the CGC 9.8. Modern villains even tend to, you know, be right around 200, maybe dip a little bit below that. So I have a feeling that, you know, yeah, it's top of the barrel for, you know, first full appearance in Null. You know, for the biggest Null fans, you want this book. But right now they're about $300 in the CGC 9.8, and I think like this one's probably headed for 225 in like a year or two, just trending, you know, slowly, where, you know, Null will just cool off unless Null makes his way into a movie or something like that. But I just feel like a lot of you know, classic villains end up you know, around that $200 level, especially modern villains where the 9.8s aren't really rare. And Venom number 3, the third print, I think is kind of the one to get. That's sort of the one that I would aim for to want. It's a little bit more expensive. Right now they're kind of dipping below 500, so I think 400 is, if you're the biggest Null fan and you've waited out this, you know, rise to Venom number 3 third print up to $800, some of the 9.8's going for, I think right around $400, maybe $425 area for Venom number 3 third print is kind of the better buy than Venom 3 first print, which a little bit overrated. Don't like the cover. You know, a modern 9.8, it's a villain first appearance. I think they tend to cool off, so a bit overrated with Venom number 3 first print. Last one, maybe some similarities to a Venom number 3 first print. Certainly some differences though. Uncanny X-Men 221. Yeah, I think a bit overrated, maybe a little overvalued right now. There's, you know, the rumors, I said this one can go either way. I've talked about this one in a couple of videos here where, you know, Mr. Sinister has pretty much been confirmed as the next MCU X-Men villain, I think it was. Certainly rumors have confirmed, I guess. So this book has heated up from where I was used to it going for like $175 there. It was a really good price for a bit. It lulled back about a year ago. To now this one being about $300, $325. Some people may be paying $350. I think this one's heated up a lot. There's a bit of a possibility that Mr. Sinister doesn't get in these movies, and there's a big letdown, and this one goes back to $175 because in the 9.8, there's a lot of them. There's over 1,000 of them. The 9.8 ratio is not the best for like a, you know, kind of a, I think this is an 87 book. So yeah, not a super rare 9.8 where the price is just going to keep going up and up and up. So I think right now, maybe a bit overrated because I do, if Mr. Sinister makes it on the big screen, I think the price is sustainable on this one for quite a few years, and then, you know, Mr. Sinister having that chance to just get into people's minds on the big screen and all that could set it up really good for the long term. But if that doesn't happen, probably a little bit overrated here, you know, kind of with this timing, with it getting hot for the rumors that Mr. Sinister is going to be in the next MCU movie. Alrighty, I think we'll wrap it up there. That was all of them, 12 CGC 9.8s. A little bit different, talking about them, you know, from that different perspective. Yeah, it is a good exercise, I think, to, you know, it's always fun to be like, oh yeah, what do I think is going to do awesome and be the best investment grade book? But when you think about it from the other way, like, why did I not buy that one? And, you know, then you know, it just makes you understand the situation a little bit better. And, Yeah, a lot of the times on these, I think cool books, like definitely making that point off the top. Great, all of them are really cool books, but maybe not so special in the 9.8 where you could save some money and either buy a raw or maybe even buy some of the alternatives that I mentioned. Yeah, and a lot of the alternatives I've recommended on the channel here because lower 9.8 ratios, a little bit less rare in the 9.8. So yeah, a lot of the things we always talk about. Alrighty, we'll conclude it up there. 7 of the most overrated CGC 9.8 comic books. If you haven't already, I would invite you to join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8. Hit the bell for all the latest video notifications. Add me on Instagram and Twitter too. All the links in the description below. And all of the list of the comic books that we talked about in the description and the honorable mentions and everything. Alright, thanks so much for watching. Yeah, really cool to kind of get at it from a different view today. Talking about some of the ones I think are overrated. Thanks again. Message me on Instagram if you had any questions about whatever it might be. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, all the support, and I'll see you on the next one.